He looked very sensible and conservative. His economic policy was basically matching Tory spending plans and tax plans. Right? His immigration policy was tough on the small boats. His European policy was, I'm happy with the Brexit settlement largely. I'm certainly not going to rejoin the EU. He actually rode back on some of the cultural issues like gender identity. So he ended up, in the end of the election, basically agreeing with the Conservative government's position on things like transgender issues. I mean, he presented a very sort of conservative approach. In fact, the manifesto, I thought this was the supreme example. When Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer was asked, what's this manifesto all about? He said, wealth creation. And that's what a Conservative leader or Chancellor would have said. And it's quite interesting. And maybe that was just reducing the target, all the ghosts of Labour victories snatched away by being too radical in the policy programme of the past. But, in some ways, you've left a blank sheet of paper. Now, the one thing about a big majority is, great, you can now start to fill it in. But if you don't have clear ideas, all those different Labour groups are going to start having ideas on things like welfare reform. There's going to be enormous pressure to reverse things like the two-child policy, which I introduced. And, so it's interesting. I think we're going to have to see. I always think on these election nights, you get the result, and then you have a new government, and everyone watching takes a new look at these people. OK, he's now the Prime Minister. She's now the Chancellor. By the way, first female Chancellor in history, worth noting. That's going to be quite a thing. But, and if over the next 3 months, 6 months, it gets to the end of the year and it hasn't really taken off, the new Labour government in '97 did make a big early impression.
Yeah, just very briefly on this. Look, what we all now think, or certainly what I think, maybe you don't, is they got a big majority. OK, we know that there's a 20 to 40 billion pound hole in the public finances. We're going to have an 8 to 10 week process in which the OBR does its work and reveals this great surprise to the nation, which everybody frankly knows. At that point, Rachel Reeves will stand up, blame Rishi Sunak, say it's all his fault, and at that, in my view, at that point we will see, because it's their only time. It's the only time when they can blame their predecessors if they put taxes up.
Worried about breaking promises to the red wall. On the cost of living and tax.
But if you don't fix it in the autumn...
a blank sheet of paper...
OK, we're going to stop that there.
You've got a blank sheet of paper...
I know you should ask. I know, I've got an idea. I know someone I can ask about what the new Labour government's going to be like. There's all of us speculating. We're streeting.
Someone has to bring order to this chaos.
Yes. Would you like to go and sit at the chair? You'll be much better at it than me. Now, listen. Shadow Health Secretary, possibly not shadow for much longer if our exit poll is correct. I guess the first thing I should do is ask your reaction. You must be trying pretty hard to contain your joy at this particular point.
I don't know about trying hard to contain the joy. If I'm honest, that hasn't sunk in. And, think back to 2019, we were told that in order to get a majority of one, we would need a Blair-style swing, a 1997 level swing, and then we're presented with an exit poll that actually shows a 1997 style majority. Now, there is some this is an expectation management. There are some important caveats to put on the numbers, which is lots of those projections will be tight races. We definitely put cautionary notes on the number of reform seats. Who knows whether the SNP will go down to the numbers predicted. So overall, we're sitting here looking at a country that has chosen change and has chosen change with Labour. And now I hope tomorrow it will fall to us to answer that call for change by rebuilding our economy, rebuilding our public services and rebuilding trust in politics as we go about it.
Before we start to talk about policy a bit, you've shadowed this brief for a considerable period of time. I don't think anyone doubts that being Health Secretary in the current environment is a very heavy responsibility. So can I just ask you what your personal kind of reaction, as you are apparently on the cusp of doing this, walking into the department, being responsible, being answerable for every issue the NHS has. Are you excited, daunted, slight nerves in your stomach as you ponder, right, got to put it all into action now?
I think the scale of the challenge is daunting. It's objectively the worst crisis in the NHS's history. We've also got, I think, the generational challenge of social care, which we have to answer. If we're serious about meeting people's needs in the 21st century, whether they're older people in our ageing society, whether they're disabled people. We need to meet those challenges, and which is something that has, frankly, eluded every government of every political stripe so far. We're ready, though, and I've been working a lot with former Labour health secretaries. I'm talking to Alan Milburn about this recently, and I say this without any disrespect to the 1997 generation whatsoever. When Alan was appointed as health minister by Tony Blair, he asked Blair what he should do, and Tony Blair said, come up with a health policy. In 1997, our keynote NHS pledge was to cut waiting lists by 100,000 by sacking a few NHS managers, which, come to think of it, was Rishi Sunak's policy at this election. We have got a much, I think, wider scope of commitments that we can deliver, promises we've made, promises we can keep and the country can afford, and a reform agenda that we will hit the ground running with, because the one thing I've had on my side, which Conservative health secretaries haven't had in recent years, is a string of successful people from my own party that I can call on who've got experience of delivering the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in the history of the NHS. We did it before, and despite the depths of the crisis, I believe the Labour Party can do it again.
Item 1, solving the junior doctors issue. How are you going to do that?
Well, I think we've seen some encouraging breakthroughs in other parts of the United Kingdom, most recently in Labour-led Wales. We've been honest ahead of the election with the BMA that 35% is not a demand the country can afford. The BMA, to be fair to them, have shown a willingness to negotiate on pay. And then there are also a wider range of issues in terms of placements, rotations. I mean, the most egregious case I've seen was a junior doctor whose partner had cancer. They had 2 kids, and the NHS showed no flexibility whatsoever about where that family was placed in terms of the junior doctor's work. I mean, that's an extreme example, but it speaks to a wider culture in the NHS which treats junior doctors poorly. And I'm genuinely angry about that, and I want to work with them to solve it. And whether it's junior doctors, nurses, consultants, porters, anyone who uses the NHS, anyone who works in the NHS can see how badly it has been managed and the depths of the crisis. And it's up to us to inspire a generational effort so that those people can look back on their careers when they retire and say, hand on heart, they were the generation that took the NHS from the worst crisis in history to getting it back on its feet and making sure it's fit for the future.
Wes Streeting, I think I can only say good luck, and thank you very much indeed for coming and talk to us this evening. Right, let's go and get a summary of what's happening in the rest of the country with Nina.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome back to the newsroom. Let's take a look at the main headlines of the night so far. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Labour's David Lammy, has told ITV News the country has had enough of the razzmatazz that gets you nowhere, and Sir Keir Starmer is ready to lead.
He will be focused on the job at hand, and he will be sticking to the plan. He set out a course, he will be sticking to it, and absolutely clear that he has to deliver for working people.
So the celebrations for Labour have started with a handful of results, and the broadcaster's exit poll predicting the party winning 410 seats on course for a 170-seat majority. If the exit poll predictions are correct, it would mean the worst result in the Conservative Party's history. The former Cabinet Minister, Baroness Varzi, says the story of the night is reform.
There's something definitely going on here with the Tory vote collapsing and the Reform vote increasing. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. Understand that, one, in terms of what's happening across the country, but understand that in terms of what the Conservative Party has to do to start rebuilding from here.
Well, it is looking like a significant night for Reform UK. The party that wasn't even on the ballot in the 2019 election, it is predicted to win 13 seats, and so far tonight has come second to Labour in 5 constituencies. So what to make of the Reform impact on this election and the next government? Paul, what Can you tell us?
Well, Nina, this is one of the breakthrough stories of the night, isn't it? And the exit poll says that the party will take 13 seats. That's more than most were predicting. We do have to be a bit cautious with the exit poll when it comes to smaller parties. Let's see how the night progresses. But, you know, certainly UKIP only had one MP at the height of its popularity. The Brexit Party never won any. Now the latest incarnation is the Reform UK Party. So let's look at how it's doing in some of these early results. And you can see it punching through here in the red wall, effectively, in the northeast. Reform UK got 29%, almost 30% of the vote here in Houghton and Sunderland South. And if you look next door in Sunderland Central, well, the result there was very similar too. Reform get 27% of the vote. They are looking in this part of the country like they are the official opposition to Labour. That is quite an achievement for them this evening. And all this indicates that it'll very likely be eighth time lucky, we presume, for party leader Nigel Farage in Clacton. Of course, he's tried 7 times before to be an MP, and tonight he has tweeted, "The revolt against the establishment," in his words, is underway, along with this short video.
It's midnight. There are 2 results in from the northeast of England that put Reform on 30% of the vote. That is way more than any possible prediction or projection. It's almost unbelievable. And what does it mean? It means we're going to win seats, many, many seats, I think.
Well, what about some of the other more recognisable Reform figures, aside from Nigel Farage? It looks from the exit poll like Richard Tice is sort of 50-50. Of course, he was the leader before Nigel Farage stepped in during the course of the election. He may well take Boston and Skegness from the Conservatives. As for Lee Anderson, who was the only Reform UK MP in the last Parliament, well, it looks like his Ashfield seat might actually go to Labour. So a mixed bag of results here. But let's go to our political correspondent, Harry Horton, who's been following the Reform campaign throughout this election. And Harry, Labour is saying to me that the exit poll may overestimate the number of seats that Reform UK is going to win. But what are Reform saying to you?
Well, interestingly, Reform sources I've been speaking to this evening are also a little bit sceptical about that exit poll. They're not sure they will win as many as 13 seats. We're just outside the Reform...
Oh. Sorry.
Head to his Clacton constituency count in the next few minutes. What Reform are confident about... millions of in this election. They think they will finish in second place in dozens and dozens of seats. And that will do 2 things for them. One, it will give them, they believe, the platform to become the main opposition party at the...
OK, apologies for the breakup there on Harry there. Obviously, this is a live programme. He's standing outside that count in Clacton there, trying his best to bring us the latest analysis. We'll come back to him later in the evening if we can. But, Nina, a fascinating picture unfolding here, but quite an unpredictable one when it comes to Reform. Yeah, absolutely, Paul. We've still got lots more to come. At around 2 o'clock, we're expecting the count for the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, at Holborn and St Pancras. And at around 2:30, we'll hear from Rochdale, where George Galloway is defending the seat he won in February for the Workers' Party. So a busy few hours ahead of us here in the newsroom. Tom.
Nina, thank you very much. It's about 1:05. If you're still up, I think the first thing I've got to say is thank you for staying up with us. We appreciate having your company in the course of this evening. We're enjoying ourselves, I think. It's fair to say, probably rather a lot more than the Conservative Party is. I'm told that Rachel Reeves is back. Not a big surprise, but we've got former Chancellor, former Shadow Chancellor here. Perhaps I can ask you, would you want to be in Rachel Reeves's shoes going into the Treasury tomorrow?
Of course you would.
Yeah, it's the best job in Britain. It's the best.
Sorry,
job
that's
in
right
Britain.
up there with the stupidest questions I've ever asked in the whole of my life. But anyway,
the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I think, you know,
He's been Chancellor. I mean, I was that close.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's unbelievably hard being Shadow Chancellor. I found it in many ways harder politically than being Chancellor. So few Shadow Chancellors make it, because you're carrying the whole weight of your party's economic message with a tiny team. You don't have the Treasury behind you. You have a few people. All people can judge you on is your words. And I was the 6th or 7th Shadow Chancellor, and Gordon Brown had basically got rid of all the previous ones. So it's very hard. And, you know, credit to Rachel Reeves. She held herself together for through this campaign. She's emerged as very clearly the number 2 figure in Labour, but with people actually in one sentence say Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. We've been saying it on this programme. They actually put up a big poster of her as well. And, she has carried Labour's economic credibility. And they go into this election ahead on the economy, which used to be the classic old way of measuring whether you were going to win an election or not. And she's also, as I just mentioned, going to be Britain's first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. And of all, that's one of the great offices of state where we've not had a woman do the job before. And, and I think she's absolutely done what the Shadow Chancellor needs to do. Of course, as of tomorrow, she's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. She's got to somehow make these sums add up. The pressures on public spending, the pressures on tax. You've got this dual pressure. You've got public spending as a share of national income at a very high level, and you've got taxes as a share of national income almost at a post-war high. And what are you supposed to do? If you put the taxes up, it's all right to say you're going to tax billionaires a bit more, but there just aren't enough billionaires. If you want to put taxes up to raise money, it's got to be taxes that most people pay. And, people are not going to want that. And if she can't find extra money, then Wes Streeting sitting there going, I'm going to solve the NHS's problems. It's not going to do it with warm words and a bit of goodwill.
We've talked about how a lot of people watching this programme won't feel they know the people who are walking into government very well. Nicola, this is a bit of an unfair question in some ways, but who impresses you and who sticks out to you when people you would be potentially up against to some degree? Who would you be worried about being up against? Who do you think is most capable? Who are going to be the stars of this new administration?
Before I do try to answer that, I do think for a lot of people, the Labour ministers that will be appointed tomorrow will be largely blank sheets of paper. People they just don't know. Now that's both a challenge, but it's also a massive opportunity to make your mark and suddenly be the rising star of a new government. So I wouldn't worry too much about that if I was Labour or one of the new ministers in Labour. I think there are Rachel Reeves. I don't necessarily entirely agree with how Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have approached the election, but I think she has absolutely emerged as a really substantial, serious figure. And George is right; it is a moment in history that she's going to become the first female Chancellor, and I don't think that should be glossed over. Wes Streeting, I think, is one of the best communicators that Labour has. He's taken on a really, really tough... I've been Health Secretary in Scotland in relatively benign times compared to now. It's a tough job, arguably, maybe after Chancellor, one of the toughest jobs in any government. I'm a fan of David Lammy. I think he is somebody that has often been underestimated. And again, I think if he does become Foreign Secretary, I think that's hugely significant. But the fact that these are the ones I'm mentioning suggests that there are so many others that just haven't yet penetrated the public consciousness at all.
Can I make a cultural point? To state the blooming obvious, Keir Starmer, like quite a few people around this table, is pale, male and stale. But actually, if you look at the top, what you mentioned, Rachel Reeves, Chancellor of the Exchequer's been in existence, for 800 years? First woman. But we got this... OK, you can speak for yourself on this issue. Anyway, somebody you
Let's
know quite well...
Let's not go down this road, shall we?
Yvette Cooper, somebody who you know quite well, Home Secretary, great Office of State. Angela Rayner, arguably the second most powerful person in the government as Deputy Prime Minister. It will, I think, feel quite different from recent British governments. Yes, Labour's never had a female leader, female Prime Minister anyway, that was temporarily a female leader. But the big jobs are occupied by women. I think that matters.
Ed, who should we look out for? Who would you pick out who maybe isn't in the front rank?
Well, I think in this election campaign, Pat McFadden and Jonathan Ashworth have run the campaign, Ellie Reeves as well alongside them. They've been on the media the whole time. And it's interesting, isn't it?
We should probably point out that Ellie Reeves is sister of Rachel Reeves.
She is?
Right. Not everyone will know that.
But she's been an MP for, I think, as long, maybe even longer than Rachel, maybe the same time. But she's really good. If you think on the Tory side, the campaign was run by Oliver Dowden. The chair was Richard Holden. None of them seemed to come on the media at all throughout the campaign.
Well, actually, Richard Holden, in fairness, did. It was a disaster.
Oh, right. Well, he certainly never came on.
Mel Stride gets the prize for...
He does.
Mel Stride gets the prize for most appearances...
Loyally defending the line.
Ever. Right.
I'm not sure that's going to save his seat, though.
Let's go to Anushka.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight how big a night this is for Labour, despite all the other things we're talking about. I'm not even going to show you the Tony Blair era seats because they've all gone red again. But look at these. These are seats that have basically always been Conservative and that are looking likely to change tonight. You're talking about chancellors, former chancellors. Look at that. Rushcliffe, according to this, is likely to change tonight. Which else do I want to show you here? Hexham, here at the bottom. This was the only seat to remain Tory in the Blair years, I think by a majority of 222 in 1997. Chipping Barnet there, that was Therese Villiers' seat, if it goes. And I just want to mention at the end Worthing West, because I met a bloke on a train. I kid you not, I met a bloke on a train a few weeks ago, and he said to me, I'm in the Conservative Association at Worthing West, and if I was you, I'd put a bet on us losing. Luckily, I didn't put a bet on, particularly given the story that unfolded, but it looks like that bloke on the train might be right if the exit poll is proved that way tonight. And just one more to pick out, Macclesfield, because I spoke to quite a lot of Labour MPs in other seats around Manchester who were in safe seats, and they were all sent into Macclesfield, and it was a really good example of the absolute pummelling they did in this election, targeting particular seats. They will be very pleased if that happens tonight.
So Macclesfield was the neighbouring seat. I mentioned it earlier. All my old team in Tatton, who are also worried about the Tatton seat, say Macclesfield has definitely gone Labour.
And Nicola, can I ask you, do you think Stephen Flynn is lost?
I don't know yet, but I'm hearing that it's not looking entirely secure, so there is a possibility there. But I'm just trying to find out more from the ground.
Because he was really impressive in the House of Commons, I thought.
He's hugely impressive, and, you know, look, if Stephen Flynn loses his seat tonight, it'll be a massive blow to the SNP. I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it, but it won't be the end of Stephen Flynn, and in some ways it will ease his passage into the Scottish Parliament. Many people in my party think that Stephen is a future leader of the SNP, and I think, you know, that's a view with some credence.
Anishka, you're about to ask it. Yeah.
When you look at that board, do you think absolute disaster for the Tories, or do you think that is demographic change that's leading people to Labour? And also the age turnover's gone so much higher now between when people actually turn Conservative. I mean, isn't that, you say it's not existential, but isn't that potentially existential?
Well, no, I mean, you know, the Conservative Party that I helped to bring out of opposition got young people voting for it. You know,
same number, this is a good fact, 2010, the same number of 18 to 25-year-olds voted Conservative as voted Labour.
Right. So giving up on young people, giving up on, you know, people who've got college degrees, all that, that's been a hopeless strategy for the Conservatives, but that, I'm afraid, has played out over 8 years. You know, I think that, you know, because we all started the night and said there was a possibility of a Conservative wipeout, and some of those polls during the general election said there'd only be 50 Tory seats left or 60. You know, as I said at the beginning, and I think it's true, people are still saying, well, it's not as bad as it could have been. But you've got Chelsea going Labour. I mean, that is about as true blue as, you know, you could have imagined. Seats like Macclesfield. You know, I mean, it's Hitchin. You know, I'm just hearing from Hitchin, from the Conservatives there. They think they've lost. That's the old Peter leadership. Bim Afalami, who's a Treasury Minister. You know, these are seats you never, ever would have thought, even in the high days of Tony Blair. Even in the big wins of Tony Blair would go.
OK, so just
on that young person point, I think just behind me, we've got our... Look at this. This is the group of seats which have a large number of young people. You can see exactly what direction they look like they're going into.
And the worry for me is that the kind of Tory solution to tonight is going to be, we just got to get the reform vote back and maybe even strike a deal with Nigel Farage. There'll be definitely Tory leadership contenders who'll be saying that. Whereas you've actually got to start again and say, you know, how are we going to get young people back? How are we going to get people with college degrees back? How are we going to get people in cities back? How are we going to get people with mortgages back? I mean, you know, we've got to start winning that rather than just thinking a kind of deal in a pub with Nigel Farage is the thing.
Is there any chance of the next Tory leader being somebody who says reach into the centre ground?
Well, there is possibly.
Really?
But I agree that there, you know, is going to be an uphill struggle because the first instinct of the Conservative Party will be to go, you didn't like what we're offering, we'll double it. You know.
But that's always parties in the immediate aftermath of a defeat always make reach the wrong conclusions and make the wrong judgments. And you know, I hope my party doesn't do too much of that if the exit poll is right about us.
Why? I mean, that's counterintuitive, isn't it? Like, surely when you've just lost, you should be desperately thinking, God...
But you retreat into yourself a little bit and you listen to the wrong people. And there's a tendency in politics to always fight the last campaign anyway. And instead of actually take a bit of time and
freed from the
learn
burden
right
of
lessons.
governing.
Yeah.
And the members, if the members don't reflect the voters, and that is absolutely true in the Conservative Party, as it was for the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was elected, if the members become detached from the equilibrium of your vote, then things get worse. And
we
worse.
have been talking about Rachel Reeves potentially being the first female Chancellor in the history of our country, and I'm very pleased to say that she joins us now. Rachel, congratulations on what clearly has been a very good night for your party. And we assume you will soon be walking into the Treasury. So before we talk about any of that, can I just ask you for your personal reaction on what looks like an epic Labour win, if the exit poll is even half right?
Sorry, I struggled to hear that. But look, if the results unfold in the way that the exit polls suggest, this will clearly be an historic victory for Labour and is really testament to the leadership of Keir Starmer, who has turned around the Labour Party and put it back in the service of working people so that we are now within touching distance of forming the next government.
Assuming you walk into the Treasury within the next day or two, you are pretty soon going to have some very difficult conversations with the British people, aren't you? And we all know what those are. Are you ready to be straight very early with the British people? Because some people argue you weren't really during the election campaign.
I'm under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that I will inherit if I become Chancellor of the Exchequer in the next few hours, the severity of the inheritance left by the Conservatives. But you ask, am I ready? I am ready for that challenge. Keir is ready. We have put together plans to bring stability back to our economy, to bring business investment back to Britain. And if we can do those things, I do believe that we can drive the wealth creation, the prosperity in all parts of our country that we desperately need. And that's what I'm determined to do if I have that opportunity.
I don't think anyone around this table, and I doubt many people watching, have any doubts that you're a very competent and serious person. I think where people do have doubts as to exactly how straight you've been with people about the choices that lie ahead in the next 6 months to a year. And I won't rehearse all the many times that you and almost every other politician was asked about the hole in the public finances and all the rest of it. But isn't the basic truth that you are going to have some very uncomfortable conversations and you're going to have to do more radical things more quickly than you gave the impression of during the election campaign?
Well, we sought in this election campaign a mandate for the policies that are needed to grow our economy. They're not going to be easy. Reforming the planning system, for example, will mean tough decisions. It will mean difficult conversations. But unless we grow the economy, we're going to continue in this doom loop of higher taxes and worse public services. And I don't want to continue going down that path. And that's why economic growth is so essential. It's what we've fought this election campaign on. And it is how I will seek to lead the Treasury if I have that opportunity to grow our economy, to bring wealth and prosperity back to Britain. I know that we have huge potential as a country, as an economy. But that potential has not been properly tapped these last few years. The 14 years of chaos, division and decline, it has cost our country dearly. It's cost our economy dearly. And I'm determined to turn that round, working in partnership with business to unlock the investment that is needed to boost our productivity and our growth performance. That's what we sought a mandate to do. And that is what I will begin work on if I become Chancellor of the Exchequer tomorrow.
But isn't there a danger that you have massively boxed yourself in by promising what you won't do when you clearly are almost certainly going to have to raise taxes, possibly in a number of places, in order to make everything add up? What other possible conclusion can be drawn?
Well, we've pledged not to increase income tax, national insurance or VAT for the duration of the next Parliament. But we have set out the closures of tax loopholes that we will make to ensure that there is an immediate injection of cash into our public services. So changing the rules around non-DOMs so that non-DOMs pay their fair share of tax in Britain. Changing the taxation around carried interest for private equity companies. Applying business rates and VAT on private schools. Those are the tax changes, the loopholes that we will close to ensure that we can provide that immediate injection of cash into our schools and into our hospitals. But in the end, you have to grow the economy. And without economic growth, we're going to continue having these conversations about tax increases and spending cuts. Unless we grow the economy, that is the only choices. But if you can grow the economy, and don't just take my word for it, listen to the 120 or more businesses that signed a letter during the election campaign endorsing our growth policies, the three Nobel Prize winning economists who backed our plans for growth. We can do this. Other countries have managed to grow the economy and therefore have the money to improve living standards and invest in public services. I'm determined to do that here in Britain. We have huge potential as an economy. I want to unlock that potential, and that's what our plans, that's what we've fought this election campaign on, that's what we're going to do.
Final question. When you became Shadow Chancellor, I don't imagine that you thought you were going to be walking into the Treasury with a majority that could be, if the exit poll is right, 170 or thereabouts. On any analysis, that is a massive majority, huge change in British politics. We've been discussing that for the last 3 hours. In reality, does that mean that a Labour government governing with that kind of majority will be more radical than it would have been otherwise?
Well, we've got a mandate based on our manifesto, and it's our manifesto that we will now get started on delivering. That is what we've got a mandate for, not other policies, but the ones that were in our manifesto. And you ask, 3 and a bit years ago when I was appointed as Shadow Chancellor, did I think I would be here today? I've been an MP now for 14 years. I've kept winning in Leeds West, but losing nationally. Keir Starmer has turned around the Labour Party, put it back in the service of working people, and so that we are now in touching distance of forming the government that I've wanted to see for so long, but has seemed out of reach for so long. And because of the work of Keir and others, and I'm proud to have played my part in that, we are now standing within that opportunity of turning around our country for the better, and I can't wait to get started at that.
Rachel Reeves, congratulations on your victory, and thank you very much indeed in your seat, and potentially in the country. But for now, thank you very much for joining us. Robert, I'd like to come to you. You've known Keir Starmer a while. What do you make of what kind of Prime Minister he's going to be?
Well, as determined as he's been in opposition, one of the things, actually I was talking to George Osborne about this earlier, that I was struck by is how the Tory party, Boris Johnson in particular, consistently underestimated him. They ran this sort of tagline against him of Sir Softy. He's probably the most ruthless politician I've ever come across. And, I mean, you know, we haven't yet got the result from Islington North, but, you know, if you'd asked me when he took over the leadership of the Labour Party that Jeremy Corbyn would be running as an independent, not in the Labour Party, I would have been quite surprised by that. And that was an absolutely deliberate decision by Keir Starmer to detoxify his party. He's also, let's be absolutely clear, an incredibly lucky politician as well. I mean, you know, he's inherited, you know, sort of circumstances, particularly in terms of the chaos in the Tory government over the last few years, and indeed it's helping him, the surge in reform, which, you know, has made this project of making Labour electable infinitely more effective than, again, any of us might have predicted at the moment that Starmer took over. You know, in terms of what he will do in government, unfortunately, as everybody's pointed out, the manifesto does not have an enormous amount of detail. There are really quite important long-term ambitions, but not a lot of detail about how we will achieve, you know, the highest growth rate of major economies, how he will reform the planning system to get there, how he will devolve power to the regions much more than, you know, which again is part of what they are proposing. So there's lots of big ambitions, not a lot of detail. What I would say is that if you've seen his track record turning around the Labour Party as an institution, you would be foolish to say that he will not be effective as Prime Minister.
I'm just going to point out here that you're watching on your screen pictures, as you probably have worked out by now, of Ed Davey arriving at his count in Kingston. Obviously, he's going to win. We assume he's going to win, unless it's a disaster. We're also expecting...
First time we've seen him in a suit and tie, right?
No, he was in a suit and tie.
But there will be a bucket of water poured over him at any moment. I'm sure.
We're also about to go to Harrogate, which, you know, has been a Lib Dem seat in the past, has it not?
Very interesting result.
Very interesting result. OK, we'll be ready to go to Harrogate in just a moment. For now, we're looking at Ed Davey in a suit, as we've said. That's a rare thing in the campaign. Jane, do you want to jump in on the Lib Dems' performance tonight, which we haven't devoted enough time to talking about, really, because it's been pretty substantial?
It's one of the difficulties on election nights is that we put so much emphasis on Labour seats and we're putting so much emphasis on reform, taking votes away from the Conservatives and helping the Labour Party. But that's going to change as the night goes on, and we're going to be looking at areas of the country in the South East and the South West, and we're going to then start looking at the effectiveness of the Liberal Democrat vote and seat gains. And I think, you know, one of the fascinating aspects of this election is going to be how these smaller parties have taken what could be very, very similar levels of vote share and translated that in the instance of the Liberal Democrats to potentially, as the exit poll is predicting, a very healthy seat share. So, you know, it's been a fascinating campaign seeing the Liberal Democrat, you know, seeing not so much substance, but nevertheless the targeting of those campaign events, if we can call them that, in those areas where tactical voting can really help the Lib Dems. So we'll switch on to talking about this a lot more as we get more of those constituencies. In Harrogate, that will be one of the constituencies that will help us understand how the Lib Dems might be doing.
Ed, Nicola and George, can I ask you, because as we're watching Ed Davey now, his campaign... genius or crazy, nonsensical?
I thought kind of...
It's about results.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, a great result for the Liberal Democrats. They've bounced right back to where they were under Charlie Kennedy and Nick Clegg. And second, I thought the fact we all noticed what he was doing in a pretty crowded field. You know, you had the Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage and Rishi Sunak. The stunts were on, you know, your show every night. And on the front pages of newspapers. What they never had was a sort of signature policy, like, you know, abolish student fees or cut...
Probably just as well, given the experience on that.
You know, so it's odd. There wasn't really anything you could remember as a policy, but I think...
I slightly disagree. I think the social care stuff that he did did cut through, actually.
That was about his
personal... That broadcast he did was very...
Yeah, but he also announced a policy which was to provide social care.
He did a very emotional party election broadcast.
And I thought that did cut through, and I thought his personal story, which was very moving, it was very unusual party political broadcast where he talked about looking after his disabled...
On the stunts, I've got a slightly different view, because the Liberal Democrats do these kind of stunts at every single election. And it's because they're doing well tonight that we're all saying, oh, it's the stunts, they've been really effective.
He did a lot more than anybody's ever done.
I would point to some Liberal leaders up in Scotland who actually have done even more outlandish ones than David has.
That's where he got the idea from.
It's a kind of standard...
I remember Nick Clegg do bungee jumping or Paddy Ashdown jumping in rivers.
But it's a standard. I suspect they would have performed like this tonight whether or not Ed Davey had performed these stunts. Now, OK, he brought some attention to his campaign, but I don't think we should overestimate...
But I think OK, Nick, can I just stop you all there? Because we're going to Harrogate.
OK.
So, this is the declaration of the result. I, Richard Flinton, being the acting returning officer for the election of a Member of Parliament for the Harrogate and Knaresborough constituency held yesterday, Thursday, 4th of July 2024, do hereby give notice that the number of valid ballot papers for each candidate is as follows. Thomas Gordon, commonly known as Tom Gordon, Liberal Democrat, 23,976. Stephen Paul Haslam, commonly known as Paul Haslam, Independent, 620. Andrew Hanson Jones, Conservative Party candidate, 15,738. Stephen Douglas Metcalfe, 136. Sian Ursula Rigby, commonly known as Sian Oakes, Green Party candidate, 1,762. Jonathan Mark Swales, Reform UK, 5,679. Conrad James Whitcroft White, commonly known as Conrad James Whitcroft, Labour Party, 4,153. I hereby declare that Thomas Gordon is duly elected.
OK, a big victory for the Lib Dems there in Harrogate. We rather suspected that would happen, but it has indeed happened. Colin, as I just jogged through changing the share of the vote, could you just talk me through what you make of this?
Indeed, it's the
Jane,
first,
maybe you could chip in.
the first Lib Dem gain of the night that we've seen, the first seat that they've really been in contention for. It's 21 on their target list, so it's halfway towards the kind of totals that the exit poll is expecting them to get. Their vote is up by about 10 percentage points from last time. So is the Reform vote. And, of course, Reform didn't contest here last time because it's been a Conservative-held seat for some time yet. The Conservative vote is down by the 20 percentage points that we have been experiencing all night long. And as we've commented earlier, this was a seat that the Liberal Democrats held in the days when they had 50, 60 seats in the House of Commons, and it looks as if that may be the case again. It's one of a classic Lib Dem area, quite affluent, strong in local government, not the kind of place that it was voted to remain. First constituency I think we've had tonight where that applies. It's classic Lib Dem territory when the Conservatives are unpopular.
So it's only a very narrow Remain lead in this area, but I think, you sort of have to wonder when Nigel Farage decided to enter this particular race whether he thought he would be helping the Liberal Democrats. And that is exactly what's happened here. I mean, it's Reform standing, the Brexit Party didn't stand. The Reform share is sufficient to take away votes from the Conservative Party, and in this instance, the Liberal Democrats take the seat.
OK, let's go and talk to Sarah Olney, who's the Liberal candidate for Richmond Park, and she is not in Richmond Park, as you can see. She's in our Westminster studio. And Sarah, you are wearing a very big smile, I see, after that Harrogate result. Perhaps not surprisingly.
I certainly am.
OK, it looks like you're going to have had a very good night. We'll wait and see, but the exit poll says. Why do you think exactly?
I think it's because Ed, in particular, and the Liberal Democrats as a whole, we've run a really positive campaign. We've really focused on the issues that matter to voters. We've put the NHS and social care front and centre of our manifesto, and we've brought forward some ambitious plans for how we can tackle the issues that people are experiencing, getting GP appointments, getting cancer care, and obviously social care, our policy to have free personal care. And these things that have really resonated with voters. I heard you talking earlier about Ed and some of the things he's been up to on the campaign trail, but it's very much highlighting some of these issues. Things like sewage in our rivers and our beaches is something that voters are really, really concerned about. But also I think people have seen that personal side to Ed, his own experience as a carer for his mother, for his son, and they've really, really connected with that. So I think, but above all, people are really, really sick to death of this Conservative government that has taken them for granted, that has trashed the economy, and people are, voting in places like Harrogate and Knaresborough to get rid of the Conservatives.
I think probably a lot of people who followed this campaign will have, in a way, perhaps slightly confused views about your leader. I think we've been discussing around this table, and I think most people who watched his interview and his party election broadcast about being a carer actually is one of the most profoundly moving things any of us have seen in politics for a very long time. He's obviously a caring and serious human being. On the other hand, there was an awful lot of very silly stunts. How do we put those two things together?
Well, I mean, I think Ed himself has always expressed it as he takes the voters very seriously, he takes the issues very seriously, but he doesn't take himself very seriously. And I think, and actually, he's the only party leader throughout this campaign whose approval ratings have actually gone up. So I think that, he was bringing forward some of these messages about the serious issues that people really care about. On the one hand, he's talking about his own experiences, that he struggles with caring, and he understands the struggles that other people go through. But on the other hand, he's somebody who gets stuck in, who enjoys himself. And I think a lot of people responded positively to the fact that he was having fun, that this was a fun campaign, it was an eye-catching campaign. And I think that really sums up Ed Davey, to be honest.
Now, there must have been moments, as you looked at some of those opinion polls in recent weeks, when you dared to dream, when they were saying that you might replace the Tories as the official opposition party. There must have been a moment where you thought, my, that would be amazing. It hasn't quite happened. Not to say you haven't had a good night, but it hasn't been quite that good.
It was always our ambition to become the third party in Parliament again. That's been our ambition now for several years, and it's something we've been working towards for a very long time, much longer than the span of this general election campaign. And we have very much, I think, achieved our ambition tonight, assuming that the exit poll is correct, and obviously very, very encouraged by that result there for Tom Gordon in Harrogate. Assuming that that exit poll is correct, we will be the third party in Parliament again. We will be back as a significant force in Parliament, and we're winning seats in our traditional heartlands like the West Country and across the South East. And obviously, it's wonderful to have retaken Harrogate.
OK, Sarah, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, as we've discussed at quite some length already, one of the emerging stories of the night has undoubtedly been the success of Reform UK. And I'm pleased to say their Deputy Leader, David Bull, is here. David, thank you very much indeed for joining us on what clearly looks like it's going to be a very good night for your party. I mean, a little bit less clear, I feel, from the exit poll, perhaps. So maybe you can begin by just telling me what you actually think is going on.
I mean, look, if this exit poll is right, that is an extraordinary result for us. We are only 4 years old. We're an insurgent party. I remember Richard Tyers sitting in my kitchen when we started the party. You know, when we were the Brexit Party, we gave the Conservative Party an 80-seat majority, and then we decided that actually we'd sort of put the party on ice. And then we decided that on the back of what the Conservative Party had done, it was time to reactivate it. And look, this is an insurgent party. It is building from the ground up. And I really hope that is right, because I think what people have misunderstood is the level of support, the shy reformers, those people like the shy Brexiteers who didn't declare to the pollsters how they were going to vote. And of course, they've come out in their droves. And there's another recurring story here, which is if you look at those 6 seats, we came second. I don't think that's been done in political history before.
I just want to press you, though, on what you actually think is happening on the ground. Do you think, does that exit poll feel right from what you're hearing back on the ground? Or you think you'll be higher? You think you might be a bit lower?
Well, I think it's pretty much in where we were hoping, in the median of the range for what we were expecting. But actually, what we're doing is taking votes not just from the Conservatives, but also from Labour, from the Red Wall seats, from those Brexiteers.
No, I get that. We've seen that.
So it's really interesting, actually.
So what happens next for your party then? Let's say you have a pretty good night. It's somewhere around 13, maybe it's only 8, maybe it's 15. Clearly, that's a massive change in British politics.
Well,
so what happens next?
Well, I think Nigel Farage in the House of Commons will be very entertaining and will hold the government to account and the opposition to account.
I hear someone laughing over at the desk, but,
I would go so far as to say we are the official opposition. People are sick and tired.
Well, you're not the official opposition,
but people are sick and tired of the two-party, stale politics that we're seeing, and we've said all the way along they're kind of two sides of the same grubby coin, and people want change. Immigration is far too high in this country. We campaigned on that. We campaigned on the economy, on cost of living, and I, as a doctor, wrote the health plan, and that has huge resonance.
We could talk about this. We could talk about immigration and this discussion that immigration is far too high. We could spend hours talking about that, but that's maybe a subject for another day. The Tory party has had a pretty awful night, and it's weird to be even talking about it in those terms, because as a result of some of those polls coming out suggesting almost total wipeout, we're sort of viewing potentially getting 130 MPs as a bit of a, not quite as bad as it could have been. But let's be plain, it is clearly an absolute disaster, the worst since 1832. That's a catastrophe for them. Are you suggesting that you merge, that you go in, that you reach an agreement? What is the plan?
So I think we need to look at this in the cold light of day. But there is no doubt the Conservative Party, I think, is over in its current form. We have 5 factions all pulling in different directions in the Conservative Party. So there are members who are clearly feeling they are in the wrong party and would like to join us. We'll look at that. I don't know is the honest answer. We need to see how the land lies in the morning and decide how we take this forward.
But surely you must have a plan. Nigel Farage has said he wants to be Prime Minister in 5 years' time, so he must have a plan.
I would never bet against Nigel.
Well, you're not betting. That's a news story in this election. Look, final point, seriously, you've had a very good night tonight. In some ways...
Well, hopefully.
Well, hopefully, from your point of view. But you had a good campaign in some ways. You had a really horrible campaign in some ways. There was clearly a lot of your candidates and supporters and terrible things said about the Prime Minister.
A minority. Let me just be
OK, well, they may be a minority, but they're people who were associated with or representatives of you.
We've removed them. And we actually had a very, very strict vetting process. We actually then brought in a company to externally vet. We paid them a lot of money. They didn't do the job. Now, when the government and the Prime Minister...
It's an easy thing to say, though. I mean, they're people associated with your party.
But it's also the truth. When the election was called, we had to expedite that process. And, of course, we were missing candidates. We fielded 620. That's pretty impressive for a very small new party. So just in terms of that, and I've been very clear about this, as has Richard and Nigel, we will not tolerate homophobia or anti-Semitic abuse or indeed Islamophobia or anything. And the minute we find them, they are out. So that's the bad part of the campaign. The good part of the campaign is we're winning with, and this is really interesting, 18 to 24-year-olds have come out in their droves to support us, we believe, over 55s and men.
OK. Interesting. Well, David, thank you for joining us. I'm going to put all of that to Jane as I walk back to the desk.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think, so one of the things we have to be careful about in election nights is that we don't yet know the vote share that Reform have achieved, and we don't yet know how many seats that they're going to win. So we have an exit poll that's telling us it could be 13, that could be lower. If we think about this kind of the possibility that there were shy Reform voters, we cannot possibly answer that. And actual fact, the polls were putting the Reform share somewhere between 14 and 20%, so we could be at the upper end of that, and that would be entirely consistent with people just saying they wanted to vote for Reform UK and doing so, rather than this kind of idea of a shy vote. So we don't know yet. It's also interesting, I think, we just heard that Reform is getting more votes amongst men, but Reform does have a problem with women. So if we look at the gender gap across different parties in terms of men and women, are they more or less likely to vote for each of the parties? We see a little bit of a lead amongst men for the Conservatives, a little bit of a lead amongst women for Labour and the Greens, but a huge difference for Reform UK. And you can see the graph here on the screen that shows just how big that gender gap is in terms of women being much less likely to support Reform UK. And that's interesting too, because Reform is taking many more voters from the Tories, as I keep saying. Those are older voters on average, so it will be the older women in particular who haven't swung behind Reform. Perhaps they've stayed at home. We don't know yet, but it's very likely that they have stayed at home rather than going to the Conservatives, at least on the basis of them being undecided and not being willing to vote for Reform. So we don't know if there are shy Reform voters yet. We do know that Reform has a problem with women.
I mean, there's one thing about this result. There's no doubt Reform has had a massive impact on the election, right?
Absolutely.
And decimated the Tory party.
Absolutely.
But what we don't yet know, that's why it's worth being awake for the next few hours, is whether they've turned that into a sizable block in Parliament. The exit poll says 13 seats, but it could be many fewer than that. And I think that's the sort of second part of the Reform story. If they don't translate it into a sizable block in Parliament, they'll have had a big impact. There'll still be a lot of conversation about them, but there won't be a kind of menace in Parliament. There'll be a menace outside Parliament, as they've been over many years in their different forms, like Brexit and UKIP. So still a key thing in this election is, do they win these knife-edge contests? Do you actually have a sizable block? Does his claim that will be the opposition in Parliament remotely stack up, or is it actually still going to be a tiny number?
But George...
we don't know that yet.
We don't know that, but we do know that it will be millions of people have voted for them, and that will dominate your party's election that will dominate the election of a new leader. That will be what it's all about. How you get those votes back.
The only thing I think you have to be careful about here. I mean, just looking at the seat of South Shields, Labour hold, not one we've even talked about. When you have to look at South Shields, Labour's vote down by 5,000, small rise in the Reform vote, but actually there's been a huge rise in the share of the vote for the Greens. They're actually up 11.6 percentage points. Also, Ahmed Khan, an independent, gets 2,200 votes. I mean, actually, there is another small party story, aside from Reform, which is Greens and Independents eating into Labour votes. For the Labour government, I would say immediately, in the next 1 or 2 years, what's happening on the left... Greens and these independents, especially as foreign policy becomes more complicated, it's going to be as big an issue, a bigger issue for Keir Starmer. He'll be watching Reform, watching the Tory party, worrying about delivery. Right now, what's going on with the Greens and the independents will be
I think that's really important. And there are reports that Jeremy Corbyn may win in Islington North, which, again, will worry him.
The point about watching the left and particularly the Greens, we don't have a single Scottish result yet. I don't know what's taken so long. But one of the things I'll be looking at tonight is the Green vote in seats there standing there. Has the SNP opened a flank, with them ending the partnership agreement, sort of becoming a bit more...
Stick with the Greens would be the general rule, wouldn't it, based on what happened in Scotland?
I would stick with the Greens. I would have stuck with the Greens, yes, but that's my view. But I will be, it may not turn out to be the case, but I will be interested to see. What your successors do,
it's so frustrating, isn't it?
I'm not going to rise to your bait, Ed. Second go, maybe third time lucky.
I think we just had a tip in, Tom, that Labour has taken Nuneaton. And if you remember, we were sat here in 2015, and when Nuneaton went Conservative, I said that means the Conservatives are going to get an overall majority.
That's when I knew I was maybe going to lose.
Nuneaton has been a bellwether since '97, always gone the way of the elected government. Not a surprise tonight, but just to say Nuneaton takes its place.
It brings back memories. I mean, that was the seat I was looking for in 2015 as the Chancellor. And when I saw Nuneaton, we started thinking, my God, we actually are on for a majority.
I started to feel queasy at that moment.
And the Conservative vote there down 32%, I hear.
Another interesting thing, we haven't really talked about one of the problems that Labour has had, which is some traditional Labour voters, Muslims or people who feel passionately about what's going on in Gaza, and erosion of Labour's vote in those seats where there is a density of people with those views. There are reports coming in that, in fact, George Galloway hasn't kept that seat he won in the by-election, and Paul War, the Labour candidate, may have won in Rochdale. So
Paul War, the Labour candidate, has not been disowned by the Labour Party, which is a bit of a change from the by-election.
There is evidence in the exit poll analysis that we're doing upstairs that Labour's share is somewhat down in areas with higher proportions of Muslims. But there is a weak relationship. It's quite a small effect.
We've talked a lot about domestic policy, and you've had on, we talked about the health policy, the economy. The last Labour government was completely dominated by foreign policy, the Iraq War. And, the first challenge, as we've just been discussing, is actually probably going to be a foreign policy challenge. Israel policy, Gaza policy. And, it doesn't feature often in general elections, but you're going to have a Labour government dealing with potentially a far-right government in France, elected in a few days' time, a Trump president, a rebellion within Labour, pressure from the Greens over the Gaza policy, where Keir Starmer has essentially taken the same position as Rishi Sunak. It's just fascinating. If the foreign policy can end up totally dominating the domestic politics, and it just doesn't feature in manifestos in the same way as
it normally happens in government.
Economy.
It's quite unusual for it to happen in opposition, isn't it?
Anushka.
Thank you. I want to talk to you about the exit poll. I mentioned that earlier tonight I actually got to go close to the exit poll, not actually in the room, but close, nearby, and a couple of doors away. I actually said to someone there it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened in my life. They then pointed out that I have 3 children, so I had to readjust that. But I just want to talk to you about the accuracy of it using our seat tracker. I can't actually believe, Tom, that it's already 10 to 2 and I've not shown it you yet, but this is my exciting other tool for the night. So basically, this counts all the seats that a single party gets up the side and all the seats that are declared through the night along the bottom. To be on track for a majority, you have to be in that diamond along the middle. Now, let's show you where the exit poll puts the parties. OK, so there you can see Labour very, very solidly in that diamond, looking, if this is correct, like we will get through that majority line at 4:30 in the morning. The Conservatives much lower down. I've actually kept on the Lib Dems there just to show you how close the Tories look to the Lib Dems on this graph. Now, could it be wrong? Is there any chance that in a few hours from now we're going to look at this and Labour are going to be dropping out of that? Well, let me show you how accurate they can be by putting this up for 2017. OK, let's stick the exit poll in for 2017. Do you remember this one? OK, there we go. And then let me overlay the actual results. You can see that generally they are very, very accurate. It would have to be very bad for it to go that wrong tonight. But we will be tracking it as the real results start to rush in.
OK, Anisha, I'm going to come over to you for a sec. Can we just go back? Because I don't really feel like we've necessarily talked about this quite as much as we could for a bit. Can we go back to the Cabinet list? Is it possible to bring that up? And maybe we can bring in George to talk about this. OK, let's talk about let's just run through again.
Do you want to put exit poll data in?
Yeah, let's put the exit poll data in and see who we think is a survivor and who is not. So, George, can I just bring you in on this conversation? Who, in your view, are, of the remaining people we think are going to keep their seats, who are the runners and riders? Top 3 or 4 people that you would pick out as certain to run, and can you just talk us through that balance?
Yeah, well, so the person widely regarded as the front runner is Kemi Badenoch, and she's been the business secretary up until, I guess, the next few hours, and she has certainly, made her mark in politics, and it's worth noting she is a black woman and very prominent. Certainly the most senior position that a black woman has reached in the Conservative Party, and the fact she's the front runner for the Conservative Party is, I would say, evidence of actually a very positive change that's happened in the Conservative Party. But so she's the front runner. Others would be Priti Patel, not to be underestimated. She's the ex-Home Secretary. Why is she a front runner? She makes one big claim. I can bring both Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, who support me, to the table and put the family back together.
Is that true?
Well, I think it is true that she hasn't been disloyal to Boris Johnson after his fall, and she used to actually work back in the day for a kind of earlier version of reform, so she knows Farage.
And she was not disloyal to
because you're talking about this, I'd love to bring up a different group here. We've actually, and we'll talk about this more through the night, we've actually ranked all Conservative MPs from left wing to right wing, and we've got a right wing group that I'll pull up because you've obviously started on the right. You can see that actually quite a lot of people look like they could lose their seats, but let's just pull up the 2 that you just mentioned. Where is North West Essex?
Essex, North West and Witham is Priti's seat.
I'll just pull it up for you in a second. Can we find that on there? In the second row, about halfway down, you can see Essex North West there. That's Wickham, but in the middle, I'll put it for you, Essex North West. So that's Kemi Badenoch's seat that you've mentioned. And actually, just below it, you can see Suella Braverman's seat. And you've obviously mentioned Witham. In fact, it's alphabetical, so I can do it really quite easily in the final corner there, which is Priti Patel.
So I've just mentioned, also there's Tom Tugendhat. He's on the left of the party. He will almost certainly hold his seat tonight. There's a big question over someone called Robert Jenrick. People will know, ex-immigration minister. He's in Newark. I don't know what we should check what's being projected in Newark.
He's been projected to hold his seat.
Right.
And actually tonight, people who are clearly going to work for his leadership campaign, some of whom I think have moved over from Suella Braverman, are already suggesting that he could be a front runner.
So I think those are some of the runners and riders. We will see.
So who would you nominate of those?
I'm not doing that on this show. Not yet.
Oh, go on.
I want to see what...
Come on, it's like midnight. It's way in the middle of the night, surely.
Maybe on the Liberal board, I can pull up for you. Would you prefer the Liberal board to the right-wing Conservative board?
Well, I fundamentally think, the Conservative Party has lost to Labour, and in order to win back from Labour, you have to move towards those people who've led.
You want somebody
You've got to be the party of aspiration again, and not the party
who do you think's going to win?
Of anger.
I mean, it slightly depends on who actually keeps their seat. If you were to put money on it now, you would put it on Kemi Badenoch. That is who the members plainly like. It is, in the end, it goes to the members of the Tory party. But, I mean, I'll have a better view when I see, come 6 in the morning, how many of the runner riders still have their seats. But I just want to point out...
Watch Priti Patel. Watch Priti Patel.
At the moment,
she will go to the right and then move to the centre ground.
But I don't understand about it, but Priti Patel is currently pretty unpopular with the members. I don't quite know why that is, but she's really... So it is odd. I just want to make one point, though, because this is... I don't know if you've seen the Rayleigh and Wickford result. This is that rare thing, a Conservative hold. Mark Francois, massively on the right of the party. Yeah. You could see him in certain circumstances actually, being in the same party as Nigel Farage. But his vote fell from almost 39,000 when keeping this seat to less than 18,000. It's a disaster for the Conservative Party.
The 8th safest Conservative seat in the country.
Yes,
and Clacton is the 9th safest.
I know Mark...
for this. Isn't there a risk with all of this, with what you're saying? If you had Priti Patel as a leader, or if you had Suella Braverman as a leader, someone very much on the right of the party, but you've only got, say, 131 MPs, are there not too many on your Liberal wing who just aren't going to go with you?
How many would it take to trigger a confidence vote?
No, but look, let's take Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer decided to serve in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet when many, many Labour MPs, including Rachel Reeves, including Yvette Cooper, refused. Yeah. But he used that as a bridge to become the leader and then shifted dramatically to the centre and expelled Jeremy Corbyn. So you can win on the right, is what you then choose to do.
He also found the issue which the members cared most about at the time, which was the second referendum. That was his base for becoming the Labour leader. And then once he became the Labour leader, his move to the centre ground also meant ditching.
OK, just on George's point, the candidate who I think has studied Starmer in that way, I think Jenrick is the candidate who will win from the right and then potentially move the party to the left.
OK, can I just ask you all a question, though, to keep it really simple? The job that you and David Cameron did in 2005, when I first met you and you were taking over the Tory party, I mean, not to rerun everything of that era, but, I went off with David to hug huskies in a slightly absurd trip to Svalbard, which is a whole other story. Every single thing you did was about decontaminating, as you saw it, the Tory brand, moving to the centre. In the same...
Hang on, Tom. To win the election, you have to win first, and then you decontaminate. To win the election, he did deals with the right of the Conservative Party, which meant leaving the European People's Party, the centre-right group.
True.
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 That you can
no, true. But in the end, you have to... This is my question. Do you, the three of you, in fact, all of us run the table, but let's start with the three of you politicians. Do you agree, leaving aside all political party allegiances and everything else, do you believe that in order to win again, the Tories would need to move to the centre? Or do you think things have changed?
David Cameron brought two things to the party, which Keir Starmer also brought to Labour. And they're the last... one was the last opposition leader who became Prime Minister, and the other is about to become the Prime Minister. So, first of all, they both looked like a Prime Minister in waiting from the first day. And there are lots of opposition leaders. It's very unfair. My great friend William Hague, Ian Duncan Smith, Ed Miliband, Jeremy Corbyn, who never, ever looked like they could be the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer on day one looked like he could be the Prime Minister. David Cameron did. Second thing is they both, won their party leadership and then shifted right to where they thought they needed to win the general election, and they were ruthless about doing it.
After.
And that is what, But they also came after several disastrous attempts by both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in opposition to go further to the extreme. And so we don't know whether the next Tory leader is going to be the next Tory Prime Minister, or recent history would suggest there'll be an interim person who probably takes the party in the wrong direction, and eventually the hunger to win will overcome the ideological opposition and the kind of lunacy of, why isn't the electorate listening to us?
Tom, sorry to butt in, but we've had quite an interesting result from Barnsley North, which has been held by Labour. And this is a constituency where the Brexit Party came in very close second place to Labour at the 2019 election. And the assumption was, and indeed I think in even the exit poll, the assumption was that Reform would win that. But of course, what the exit poll can't do very well, understandably, is take into account local factors. And this is one of those seats where Reform disowned their own candidate and said, even if you win, you're going to have to sit as an independent for making very distasteful, sort of racially prejudiced remarks, he clearly hasn't won. Labour apparently won by a majority of about 8,000. So the electorate at least have taken that on board, shall we say.
And the mood is the same as going to happen in Barnsley South as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And just to be clear, there's a recount in Basildon, so Holden, the party chairman, may...
OK, we'll hold on Basildon. I feel like there's a phrase for that, but that's probably not it. I've joined by a very excellent panel at this point in the evening. Miranda Green from the Lib Dems, Aisha Hazarika, Labour peer, former aide to Harriet Harman, amongst many other things, stand-up comedian. There's a long list. Columnist Gavin Barwell, former Chief of Staff in number 10 Downing Street. Where would we start? Where do any of you want to start? What a night so far. Complete catastrophe for the Tories, which somehow feels like it's not the catastrophe that we thought it was going to be. Extraordinary result for Labour, but kind of complicated when you read into the weeds about it all. Miranda, maybe you start. Great night for the Lib Dems, really great night for the Lib Dems. We perhaps haven't talked about that as much as we think. How are you reading tonight?
Well, it seems to me one of the interesting things is how Labour could achieve this large majority on quite a low vote share, and the fact that voters have gone to other smaller parties, including the Lib Dems, and of course there's this reform surge. But it's almost as if there's that kind of fracturing of the electorate that we sort of saw in maybe elections to the European Parliament a few years ago, but tends to disappear at general elections as people sort of stream back towards the kind of blue and red blocs. And something quite different seems to have happened this time, maybe because people were so motivated by getting rid of the Conservative government that they kind of reached for the nearest weapon to hand. You know, it's been described as a sort of punishment-beating election for the Tories. So you use the thing to whack them with that's nearest to you locally. And I think it therefore will have a really strange and interesting outcome in terms of what those opposition benches in the House of Commons are going to be like. You know, how's that going to work? You're for the first time going to have two potentially competing voices on the right. You know, you're going to have the Lib Dems trying to work out, can they oppose Starmer from the sort of slightly less centre-left ground, or do they become a bit more bang-on centre Cleggite in their pitch? You'll potentially have these voices on the left as well if Corbyn wins that seat where it seems to be teetering on the brink. So I think, you know, the dynamic in the House of Commons is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch as a result of all this.
Aisha, I always think it's really hard on nights like, you know, here we are in the studio, it's the middle of the night, and it's quite hard to get a sense of what we're really going to be feeling when we wake up tomorrow, and kind of everything has changed. It's not just that the government's changed. To some extent, it changes the whole mood of the country after such a long period of Tory rule. I mean, what are your thoughts at this point in this evening?
Well, look, I think you can view this through the lens of punditry, which is like, don't go for the obvious story, maybe kind of come in through a different angle. But I think to most normal people, when they wake up in the morning, it will be a historic time for them because they have lived under a Conservative administration for such a long time. There will be people, you know, who've never sort of grown up other, you know, than having a Tory government. And I think there will be, I understand the sense of disillusionment in politics, but I think people will feel a palpable sense of relief that change has finally come, because I think the lived experience of people up and down the country, unless you're like the super wealthy, people feel that after 14 years of a Conservative government, this country is really broken on every single level, economic, social, the fabric of people's communities, politically. It just feels like everything is really freed. So, yes, there's going to be lots of analysis about reform. There'll be analysis about, you know, how manageable, you know, how shallow this kind of majority will be. But it's also a moment in history. Let's not forget, in the last 100 years, there have only ever been 6 Labour Prime Ministers. Of that, only 4 were elected. So whatever the figures are, we'll cut and dice and splice them. A win is a win. And when Keir Starmer took over, even when you look at the Hartlepool by-election, which was not that long ago, people were saying, do you know what, I don't think it's, you know, he might be a caretaker leader who gets Labour, you know, they do a wee bit better in the next set of general elections, but we're out of the game for another sort of 2 seasons. And I think what he has done in a very short space of time is remarkable. So I think, for me, that is the big story of the night. History is being made tonight, and Britain is going to change tomorrow.
Gavin, my memory of you towards the end of Theresa May's premiership, when you were Chief of Staff, was exasperation tending to something slightly darker about your party in terms of your feelings about it. I mean, what are your thoughts tonight? I mean, you just seemed so frustrated with the way it was behaving and the way many MPs were behaving. So what are your reflections tonight after what's, let's face it, been an utterly dismal election campaign?
Mixed emotions. Some of us have been warning that this has been coming for a long time and we weren't listened to. But I think, trying to look forward, there are three really big strategic problems the Conservative Party's got. One is the age profile of its vote. If no one changes their mind next time, there'll be a further swing away from the Conservative Party because many of its voters will die off over the next 5 years. So you've got to do something about the age profile of the vote. The second problem you've got is this division on the right. You know, Labour struggled with this in the 1980s after the SDP broke off. It is really hard to win when the right is divided. But the idea that just aping reform is a solution to the problem is completely wrong. You'll lose more voters in the centre. And the third thing is the tactical voting, which is what has really led to this result being so catastrophically bad. And there's always been in the Conservative Party what I would call a Millwall tendency. Some people who have glorified in left-wing people not liking us. And what we've learned today is that actually being really unpopular with a large chunk of the electorate has real-world consequences in terms of tactical voting against you. So there's three big problems there that whoever... You know, I heard George speculating on who the candidates might be. I'm less interested in personality. I want someone that's got a strategic answer to those three problems.
I'm going to come right back to you, Aisha, but Swindon North is about to declare, so we're just going to go there and see what's happened.
That's fine. They can't come on the stage, right?
It's more efficient.
I know. Get more room. Great idea.
Yes, I think
ladies and gentlemen, this is the declaration of the result of poll for the election of a Member of Parliament for Swindon North. I, Sam Mowbray, being the acting returning officer at the above election, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the said election is as follows. Andy Bentley, Green Party, 2,366. Flo Klukas, Liberal Democrat, 2,086. Debbie Hicks, Independent, 260. Scott Victor Abbas Hunter, Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, 139. Will Stone, Labour Party, 17,930. Justin Paul Tomlinson, the Conservative Party candidate, 13,827. Les Willis, Reform UK, 7,557. There were 124 rejected ballot papers, and the turnout at this election was 60.48%. And I do hereby declare that Will Stone...
OK, interesting result there. I just don't have my magic iPad in front of me, so I'm going to ask someone else to bring up just the change in the share of the vote. Can we have a look at the change in the share of the vote for a second? Colin, can I just ask you to chip in from the other side of the studio here?
Absolutely. It's a pattern that we've been seeing in many of these seats tonight, Tom. The Conservative vote down very sharply indeed, being split largely between Labour and Reform, and here again a seat where Brexit did not contest in 2019, so they're coming from a flat base, but clearly many of those Conservative voters from 2019 are as happy to vote for Reform tonight as they are for Labour. But this is the safer of the Swindon seats, and what we said about Robert Buckland applies much to Justin Tomlinson. This is southern England, there's very extensive housing developments, there's sort of a younger population, a different kind of demographic, so Labour's back, but there's still that underlying Reform core as well.
It's a better vote for Labour than we've seen in quite a lot of seats, though. I mean, this is quite a big jump in the Labour vote here.
So one of the things that the exit poll has been telling us, and this is the first seat where we have a sort of exemplar of the pattern that we're expecting, is that the Conservatives would do worse in Leave areas where the Brexit Party didn't stand last time. This is the first Leave constituency where the Brexit Party didn't stand last time, and that's exactly the result that we would have been expecting.
Aisha, can I come back to you? You were about to make a point which may or may not be relevant to Swindon North.
I just wanted to pick up on what Gavin said, and I have lost many elections with the Labour. We're very good at losing elections. And I think what's really important for the Conservatives is not to learn the wrong lessons from this. So the comfort zone will not to be focusing on the fact that Labour has done really well. The comfort zone position will be, oh, reform. Let's all become completely obsessed with chasing reform. And we have learnt this from painful experience in the Labour Party, is that the tendency is to lean into your comfort zone. We went further to the left thinking that that's, you know, some kind of political utopia lay in that direction. And the Conservatives, I'm sure they will chase that direction on the right, but they would be absolutely wrong to do that.
OK, Gavin, I'll let you pick up on that, but just before you do, James Cracknell has lost Colchester to Labour, I'm just being told. Now, James Cracknell, the Olympic rower, who put himself at the forefront of a day's news coverage in the campaign by saying something that I probably can't say even at 2:10 a.m. in the morning on our show, but it wasn't very polite, about his own party. Didn't do him much good. He hasn't won.
So I completely agree with what Aisha said, and I think you've got to learn the lesson of history. 1979, Labour went in the wrong direction. 1997, Conservative Party went in the wrong direction. It took 8 years until David Cameron and George Osborne finally got us starting to recover. I don't want to wait 8 years for the Conservative Party to learn this lesson. And Labour in 2010 as well,
absolutely.
right? Went in the wrong
and
direction.
Also, you're already hearing it tonight. I've heard so many Conservative commentators, really sensible Conservative commentators, go, do you know what? It's not as bad as we thought it was going to be because we're over the 100 mark. And you're like, no, guys, that is totally the wrong way.
It's the worst since 1832, but it's not that bad.
Miranda. One of them over there, actually.
Miranda.
But also, if you look at the territory that the Conservatives are losing tonight, if they make those mistakes, there's a real danger that that territory is then gone. You know, they've lost places that have never been lost before tonight. So it's actually a whole new ball game in terms of whether they screw this up, frankly. You know, those bits of the southeast where people, because of demographic change, have moved out of the cities and are now voting Lib Dem if it's convenient for them, or Labour in other places. If they continue those patterns and if those demographic changes kind of embed there and they make these mistakes, then a whole bunch of southern England is lost to the Tory party.
Final thought. It is a mark of the strategic disaster of the last few years that we have simultaneously convinced one group of electors that we're too right-wing and another group that we're not conservative enough. And that's what happens when you talk populist right and then you fail to deliver.
And one final thought from me, Scotland. Very, very important to see Labour making such a comeback in Scotland when the SNP has been so dominant for such a long time.
OK, thank you very much indeed for your time. And I will bring all that back to the desk. Any thoughts from anyone? As Jane, I feel like you're about to say something.
We talked, haven't we? We've talked here and we've just been listening to this conversation about what the Conservative Party needs to do. And Nicola said something which I thought was incredibly important earlier, which is that parties don't just respond badly to defeat, but they also tend to fight the last election. And I think the difficulty I've had looking at this Conservative government over the last years is that it seemed to me that they were essentially trying to refight the 2019 election in the belief that the Boris Johnson coalition would be enough for a victory. The problem there is that the Boris Johnson coalition is now substantially smaller. And so the reasons that people backed Boris Johnson in 2019 were a lot to do with Brexit. Of course, that was a majority opinion to back Leave in the referendum. What the Conservatives have done is to chase after minority opinions and a very small proportion of the electorate in many regards. And so if you look at the age profile, and Gavin was talking about this, the average age now that you become a Tory, if you look at the kind of correlations, the relationships, is 70. And so you're not going to win an election if you appeal to the over 70s. Obviously, what we're seeing tonight as well is that's compounded by the splitting of the right. The problem is if you go chasing after those right of centre or right-wing voters, you're not going to get them all back. So you're not going to get all of those Reform voters back. At the same time, you're going to alienate those voters you're also losing to the Labour Party. So we've talked loads about Reform. The Conservative Party is also losing voters to Labour. Those are working-age voters that the Conservatives absolutely have to attract again. OK, we just got some pictures, I'm told, of Keir Starmer arriving at his count in Holborn. This is almost certainly, unless the
early results, and the exit poll are catastrophically wrong, which realistically I don't think they're going to be. At this stage in the evening, Keir Starmer is going to be our Prime Minister in the course of tomorrow. We'll have the usual comings and goings. Rishi Sunak will be leaving Downing Street, going to the Palace, and Keir Starmer will be arriving there. Speaking of what parties need to do when they've had a bad night, Nicola, can I ask you, if this turns out to be the result we expect from the SNP, what does John... You're very close to John Sweeney. What does he do?
I should say I'm hearing that there are a lot of recounts underway or about to be underway in Scotland. That's just what I'm hearing, but that might explain why we haven't had a single result yet. Right. I'm also hearing that things are looking better for Stephen Flynn, but again, that's only information that is second-hand. Look, I mean, first thing I would say is John Sweeney's leadership is under no threat, regardless of the result tonight. He will lead the SNP into the 2026 Holyrood election. The same might not have been true had Hamza Yousaf still been leader tonight, but that's not the situation we are in. And I think the mistake opposition parties will make is, if this is the result or anything like it tonight, is just assuming that the SNP is dead and buried for 2026. Yes, the SNP has to re-establish trust on some of the core competence in government issues. We've been in government for 17 years. This is a really difficult time for any party of government, but that doesn't let us off the hook. We've got to do that, and John is, absolutely the guy to really take on that challenge. And, as I was saying earlier on independence, the independence issue is not gone away, but we need to, focus hard again on making it relevant to the issues that concern people in their day-to-day lives, which, shouldn't be beyond us, but that is the challenge. Independence is not some abstract goal. It's absolutely about how we build a better country, raise living standards, make people better off. So these are the challenges for the SNP. It will feel coming out of tonight, if the result is anything like the exit poll, that is a mountain to climb. But we should take a bit of time and refocus ourselves, and I don't think it is game over in any sense for the SNP. Final point I would make is about the aspiration and in tune with young people. I think the party's got to watch that. We have, for a long time now enjoyed majority support amongst young people. We've got the ending of the deal with the Greens, what appears to be a slight softening of our commitment on climate change. I think we've got to be very careful on that and not fall into the trap of moving perhaps a bit to the right, although the SNP will never be right-wing, but a bit to the right of where we have been. I think that would be a mistake. So these are
you can just see on the right of your screen there that Lee Anderson has just walked on, of course, defected from the Tory party to Reform, is the candidate there, and they are about to announce whether he has won.
At this election is as follows. Lee Anderson, Reform UK, 17,062. Alexander Coates, the Green Party, 1,100. Daniel Holmes, Liberal Democrats, 619. Ria Keane, Labour Party, 11,553. Debbie Solomon, Conservative Party candidate, 3,271. Well done, Debbie. Jason Zadrozny, the Ashfield Independents, putting people before politics, 6,276. The number of ballot papers rejected was 102. The vacant seat is 1. The electorate was 68,929. Ballot papers issued 39,986. And the turnout was 58.1%. I do hereby declare that Lee Anderson is duly elected.
Well, that is a resounding result from the people of Ashfield. And let's hear what Lee Anderson, defector from the Tories, has to say about it.
Massive thank you to all the staff that's been here tonight. I've been worked incredibly hard, and all the people who's worked throughout this election campaign. Special thanks to Ashfield District Council. But the biggest thanks of the night goes to my wonderful team over there who have stood by my side and watched me being grumpy over the past 6 weeks. They've been fantastic, and I could not have done it without them. I stood in this town, my hometown, 4.5 years ago, as a Conservative candidate and won. And I won comfortably, and the people of Ashfield backed me, and they now back me again as the Reform candidate for Ashfield. I said a few weeks back that there was going to be a reckoning on election night, and Ashfield, which is the capital of common sense, they are part of that reckoning. Now, this wonderful place, which I call my home, is going to have a massive say in how this country is shaped in the future. I want my country back, and Ashfield can play their part in that. Thank you.
There we are. Ashfield. He is in. George.
First of all,
Douglas. Sorry, Douglas Alexander is in. I'll come to Nicola to talk about that in a second. But Douglas Alexander, obviously, do we call him a grandee of the old Labour, colleague of Ed's, former Shadow Foreign Secretary, etc., etc., etc. Lost to Murray Black. Back in. Anyway, Lee Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a big moment. This is the first Reform-elected Member of Parliament at a general election in our history. And you know, I think you have to say that if Lee Anderson had stood as a Conservative, he would have lost. So if he'd actually stuck with the party, where he was Deputy Chairman,
he was thrown out of the party for saying something racist.
And, you know, the risk, I think, you know, of tonight is there are going to be a load of Conservatives saying, how did Lee Anderson ever leave? We've got to get the Reform Party back and people like him back. And meanwhile, and we went there because it's such a big result, with all these other places, like Wrexham and Colchester, you know, that have declared...
I'm just going to bring up the change in the share of the vote, George. Sorry, while you're talking. Let's just have a look. Can we bring it up on screen?
Redcar, all the...
In Ashfield,
you know, all these places that we've lost to Labour. And the conversation's not going to be about losing to Labour, it's all going to be about reform. Even though tonight, you know, that's what's actually happening. But it's results like this that are going to shape the Conservative conversation and a lot of the political conversation for the next couple of years.
It's really interesting. I mean, the other thing, just